we're going to make it harder on our people so it's easier on us in the budgeting process. And so we don't have to fight fights that are uncomfortable and not realize just how detrimental that is, not just to our ability to accomplish mission in the immediate future, but our long-term growth, because that's one of those ways where somebody goes, you know what, it's really like, I love our mission. I love what we do. I love my colleagues, but it kind of sucks to work here. It's really hard. So I'm going to go do this very same thing somewhere else where they actually have vision and budget.
Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here today with Andrew Olsen. Andrew, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Thanks, Mallory. I'm so excited to be here. It's great to see you again. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Me too. Let's start with you just telling everybody a little bit about you, your background, your work, and kind of what brings you to our conversation today.
Sure. Professionally, I'm the Executive Vice President of Fundraising Solutions at DickersonBakker. We're a consulting firm that serves nonprofits and ministries all over the world. And I lead some of our fundraising work, but I've been doing this for 25 years. I've worked both inside a children's hospital, leading development, but also as a consultant to all sorts of different organizations, different shapes and sizes. Personally, I live on a little family farm in Knoxville, Tennessee. You might hear a rooster outside as we're talking because it's a real thing. And my wife and I are raising 3 girls and trying to teach them resilience here on the farm.
I love that. And I feel like you and Nathan Chappelle need to have some like farm animal content collab at some point.
Nathan is going to be out here sometime in September.
Amazing.
And we're going to spend a day together. So yeah, I just saw him last week at Bridge and we chatted about lots of farm animals. Yeah.
I love that. Well, there are so many different things we could talk about today, but I feel like we're in this moment right now in the sector that is calling us all to be more. I love what you said about, your girls on the farm and resilience. And that's a word I've been thinking about a lot as our sector has been under a lot of additional pressure this year. And I want to talk about change and culture and what are some of the things that are getting in our way and what can we do about it? And just to sort of frame this up maybe one step further, I feel like it's so interesting, the tension around change in a change-making sector. It kind of like makes me pull my hair out sometimes where like we are responsible for being the change makers. We pride ourselves on being change makers. We are working to do things that have never been done before, to solve problems that have never been solved before. But then when you get down to the nitty gritty of changing our behavior, our strategy, our tactics, we freeze up. And so I'm curious, like from your perspective, like why can't we reconcile those two pieces of who we are?
I have so many thoughts on this, and I'm so glad that this is what we're talking about. So my snarky response is that I feel like there are a lot of people who've made it into middle management in organizations who believe that their title is director of stagnation. Right? Because it's like there are so many great ideas that go into a vortex and just get stalled. But when we actually peel back a few layers, and so our firm studied this over the last 2 years. So 2 years ago, we did a study where we talked to a couple thousand nonprofit leaders and development leaders, and actually like it ran the kind of covered the spectrum of roles that we surveyed. And one of the most interesting findings that we had in 2023 was that the majority of C-suite leaders and frontline development folks in a variety of roles said, we know we need to change. And we actually know the things that we need to change. Like 87%, some ridiculously high number. There was a ton of agreement. But then what shocked us was that like 2 questions later, they said, like over 60% said, but we have no plan to change. And so we thought, well, wait a minute. That's also a really high, like it's a majority, right? Why is it that there's such a high recognition for the need for change and yet such a high barrier? And so in 2024, we rolled out a study where we specifically asked more questions about change. And we did 2 things. We did a standard survey, but then we left a lot of space in that survey for open-ended feedback. The things that impede change in organizations, according to the survey findings that we have, are not going to shock you, right? People said to a very high degree, we don't have the budget for change. We don't have the technology or the capacity to leverage technology. internally to effectively manage change. And our people are burned out and there's too many things going on, too many priorities. So like we just can't get to it. And then we also heard a lot of talk about either lack of communication or poor communication across organizations that stymied change. And none of these are surprising, right? You didn't sit there and go, oh my goodness, I can't believe they said that, right? You're like, yeah, of course it's those. As we peeled back and asked people to talk more about it, what we found is that there's actually a really high level of agreement on certain things that need to change within organizations, but a lot of it comes down to the prioritization, right? So I was a little bit shocked that CEOs said things like, my people are so busy, they're doing too many things. And my natural response to that is like, and you're the leader, you get to set the tone for how many things get done, right? And so, I'm looking at this saying, so many people in leadership need to take a different posture, right? And maybe these are going to be some unpopular statements, but just going to make them. Like, as leaders, if we are not setting the tone and saying, well, wait a minute, don't do the unimportant things so that you can do the things that are critical, that's our fault. That's not the fault of the employee who has no agency and can't make the decisions, can't change direction. Like, that's purely a leadership issue, right? If we're saying, our people are so overworked, they're taking on too many things. Okay, well, as the leader, you set the framework for that, right? And so I feel strongly that a lot of this sits on leaders who are either allowing their people to take on too much and not reining things in, or who are simply putting too much on their people, right? And it's one thing to say we have high expectations, we do a lot of work, we get a lot done. But it's another thing to say those things and then to also say, and burnout is critically high in our organization and we're losing people every 12 months and we can't retain staff. Like, those two things have one reason, right? It's purely because of leaders not showing up well and not taking the initiative to say, we're going to stop the craziness. And then the technology piece, like, we've all seen it. You and I were laughing about this before we came on camera together, right? The poor nonprofit organization who's like on Windows 7 still, trying to get things done in a world that has leaped ahead of them by 20 years, but they can't get the budget to update their computers, right? Or they're working in a CRM that doesn't allow them to do anything that they need to do because there's not been any expenses budgeted for growth and development in the tech space. Or if they did, let's say they bought it, 9 times out of 10, they didn't buy training, right? And so, like, from where I sit, so much of that, again, is about we're making fast decisions, but not necessarily right decisions. And I think that we need to step back and say, well, wait a minute. If we need to get better in this area, we have to fund these things. We have to fund them to an acceptable level. And we have to prepare for our people to have a certain level of training and development expectation. So if we're going to fund a new CRM, we've got to fund training, or we're going to be in the same boat that we were when we had the old CRM, and we're not going to be able to use this effectively, right? So these things are all leadership decisions. And I feel like one of our biggest challenges is we've not equipped our leaders to make those difficult decisions in a way that actually advances our mission.
Okay, there's so much here. I was just taking some notes because there's a few like kind of through lines that I feel like I'm hearing in what you're saying. And so I want to say them back and hear if you agree or if there's like something else here. One is that like underneath all of this is just the lack of value of our time. Like our time, our team members' time. Like if we think it's less expensive to not buy a new computer than to have our staff members struggling at spending 15 hours doing something that should take 2. Like, to me, that is just this like really undervaluation of human costs.
Yep. And I put that squarely on the board, right?
Yeah.
Here's the conversation that happens. I've already, that human capital is a sunk cost. I already went through the fight to get the budget for that. So I can make them do whatever at whatever level. And that's better than having to go back to the board and argue for $1,000 for a new laptop or a whatever, right? And so you're exactly right. We've said we're going to make it harder on our people so it's easier on us in the budgeting process. And so we don't have to fight fights that are uncomfortable. and not realize just how detrimental that is, not just to our ability to accomplish mission in the immediate future, but our long-term growth. Because that's one of those ways where somebody goes, you know what, it's really like, I love our mission, I love what we do, I love my colleagues, but it kind of sucks to work here. It's really hard. So I'm going to go do this very same thing somewhere else where they actually have vision and budget.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like this. Well, I talk about this a little bit in what the fundraising in a different, I say, I like have this quote inside the book that is like, if you think it's uncomfortable talking to a donor about, a disagreement or something like that, before you get the money, just imagine how uncomfortable it's going to be later on, if you accept the money. And so there's like this deflection of immediate discomfort at the expense of so much long-term pain. And it's like, so, and do you think that's rooted, like from your perspective, in this like scarcity mindset? Because it's interesting, like I'm in the, the AI world more now between Fundraising AI and Practivated. And I'm thinking about so many of the ways in which we're hearing AI talked about, right? Like reducing your time to do this, and all about kind of increasing your capacity quickly. Hearing you talk about Windows 7, I'm like, oh my God, we had the opportunity to do this for years, like without AI, just by like updating our systems. And we could not find, like, that was not valuable enough to us. And so I'm just, what is that rooted in?
Yeah. So I do think a lot of it is that scarcity mindset, but this is also not unique to nonprofits. I think it's amplified in nonprofits, but I see it in the corporate world all the time too, right? Part of it, I think, is that we don't teach and train leaders to lead, right? We identify someone who is really good at something, and we say, because you're good at that something, we're going to put you in charge of the people who do that something. You may have zero skills and capabilities to lead an organization or to lead a team. And God forbid we invest in leadership development, because that's just a cost, right? There's no revenue associated with it in a direct way. So we can't go to the board and go to our CFO and say, spend this $3,000 on training and you're going to get $10,000 out of it. No, we say, well, if you want training on that, that's got to come out of pocket, because we're about mission, right? And so we have these people that we've promoted into roles and given a set of expectations and a set of goals, but haven't equipped them to actually get there. Right. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think the other part from a financial perspective is I've served over 1,000 nonprofits, and I think I've met 2 that have a financial strategy. They all have a finance department. They all measure what comes in the door and what they spend, but the majority don't have a financial strategy. And what I mean by that is these other 2 organizations, what's unique about them is they look at their budget every year in the planning process, and they say, okay, this is what we need to fund operations. This is where we want to grow. But we also know we're going to do some things that aren't going to work this year, right? We're going to test some new things. We're going to try some things. They're not all going to be successful. So we have to create a reserve capital fund that we can use when some of those things don't work to offset the potential loss. And we also need to fund, growth capital. We need to say, we're going to set aside $20,000 to test this other thing. And if it works, it's going to make us $1 million over the next 2 or 3 years. So few organizations think about finance in a strategic way. And so because of that, they're like on this hamster wheel. They're chasing every dollar and every reporting cycle. And, it's all about what shows on my 990 versus how do I grow this organization? And I think it's an area where we're woefully under leveraged in that sort of financial strategy arena. There just aren't enough really good financial strategists in organizations. There aren't enough C-suite leaders who understand finance, right? I mean, and that's not a knock on them. Think about how most leaders came up, right? They came up through a program role, right? They weren't likely responsible for budget management, for P&L, for financial strategy. No one said to them, hey, as you elevate into these new roles, we need you to really be good at this. And we also aren't equipping them with staff that know that have those functions and those capabilities either. So it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I mean, that was absolutely true for me. Like when I became an ED, like the financial piece was like without a doubt the most overwhelming, where I had the least
Yeah.
skills. And I was very lucky to have like a board treasurer who really sort of took me under their wing and spent a ton of time with me building that skill there. And then they sent me actually through some training programs at a local like nonprofit capacity building organization. So I completely agree with you. And that R&D budget component to me also just feels so like, as we're talking about it, just so basic in a certain way,
Right.
because of course we are going to fail at certain things. And
Right.
this is the other piece of the leadership thread that you were talking about before, is like, I feel like we have this real tension with leadership in our sector around what we say we want from our staff and what we model as a leader. So I'm thinking
Yep.
about this related to things like perfectionism and failure, right? We're like, this is a place for innovation, but then don't tell me what you care about. Show me what you pay for, what you track. Like, how do we get people to sort of like understand the inconsistencies in what they say they want and what they're ultimately allowing to happen based on the structure and budget of their organization?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's so interesting. So I was talking to an organization recently and they said, we want to evolve our messaging strategy and our fundraising strategy to go from talking about the thing that we've done for the last 30 years to talking about the thing that we do now, which is fairly different, right? And in theory, that makes a lot of sense. It papers out nicely. But when that change causes some donors to say, well, wait a minute, I'm not really in for that thing. Like, that's not the thing that got me here. And so I'm just not going to respond. I'm not going to give it the same level. When it impacts cash flow, all of the vision tends to go by the wayside, right? So unless you've intentionally prepared for it and you understand that there's risk and you're willing to go through it, the likelihood is that you go, oh, wow, that first thing didn't work. Go back to what we used to do, right? And that just keeps organizations in that same cycle. And I think part of that is purely fear-based, right? It's leaders who don't want to sit in front of the board and talk about, the thing that failed and be labeled the failure. But also, it goes back to finance, right? If you're not building a reserve capital fund somewhere where you can draw down and say, well, if this performed at 15% lower than we expected, we've still got to cover that cost, right? Very few have that. And we've got into this mentality of saying we are going to budget to the penny. So if I'm going to raise $2 million next year, I'm going to spend $2 million. Instead of saying, you know what, we need to grow a lot in the next decade. Maybe I'm going to raise 2 million. I'm going to spend 1.4 and I'm going to put 600 aside. And I'm going to use that to create leverage and growth over the next couple of years so that we get close to where we need to be in a decade. There's such a mentality of like spend every dollar that you raise every year. And that hamstrings so many organizations.
Wow. There's so much in here that we could explore. I'm curious, like for folks who want to take one step forward here, that like maybe they are really scared to talk to their board about it or their staff, like want to make one incremental change towards aligning what they want with how they do things. Like what would be your top 1 to 3 recommendations?
Yeah. So I think the first one goes back to something you said a minute ago. Before you do anything like this, you have to create a culture that appreciates change. And so the first thing you have to do is do the internal work so that when someone fails, they don't get smacked over the head with a brick because they screwed something up, right? You have to start to build the sort of the muscle memory in the organization that says failure is about learning and it's not a catastrophe, right? It's something that we all do and it's acceptable and it's encouraged. Now, fail fast and fail as inexpensively as possible, but don't not fail. And so if we don't have that as sort of the foundational understanding in our organization, then any kind of change initiative is probably not going to get off the ground. Because the minute you change one thing and it doesn't result in what you expected, someone's going to get, taken to task for it. And the entire organization is going to go, oh, yep, they said they want to change, but look how they responded to Sally, right? And then you're done, right? So the first thing you have to do is really work on that. And that's a leadership level thing, right? Like that's not something that the average employee can totally adjust on their own. A leader has to come to the table and say, change is important. Safety is important in our organization. Culture is important. And we're going to do the hard work to prepare for this, right? Anyone can surface that conversation and begin the dialogue, but ultimately the leadership team has to endorse it and really embrace it. And the board also has to do that, right? I think beyond that, I would say test small things, right? I had a conversation with Brady Josephson recently over at Charity Water, and we were talking about innovation. And he was like, look, there's capital I innovation, but there's also small I innovation, right? Like not everything has to be swinging for the fences. And so if you really want to build that skill set, start with small things, test little things, learn from them, but don't just test and learn and move on. Like that's when you have to say, okay, we've learned this now. How do we apply it to our entire business, right? This thing that we tested and learned from taught us 4 different things. How do we use those and make sure they spread across the entire organizational structure so that everyone gets value out of them? And then you build on top of that next, right? I think one of the things that we as an industry are really good at, we'll test a bunch of stuff. We'll say, oh yeah, we learned all of this, and we don't apply it anymore. We don't make sure that it gets rolled out across the entire business, if you will. And I think that, because of that, we also have a lot of leaders who are like, look, I'm tired of testing and innovating and changing because we change one thing and then it doesn't permeate and we're back where we were a year ago, right? So we've got to get really disciplined about that. And then the other thing I think is if you really want to be successful, I don't care what role you're in an organization, if you don't understand the P&L, you will never be as successful as you can be.
Ooh. Okay, so much wisdom in such a short amount of time. Andrew, thank you for joining me today and just sharing all of
Thanks
this
for
with
having me.
my community. Where can folks go to connect with you, follow along? Yeah, learn more from you.
Easiest place is LinkedIn, Andrew Olsen, or pretty simple, rather. I'm there all the time. You can connect with me whenever. You can also hit me up at DickersonBakker.com. It's Baker with 2 Ks.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm so excited for folks to get to listen to this and so grateful for the work that you're doing to support leaders in our industry and support change.
Likewise.
Your work.
Yeah. Thank you.